The storm had come suddenly over the Scottish Highlands, rolling across the hills like a dark curtain. Rain lashed against the ancient stone walls of Glenmore Castle, and the wind howled through the narrow battlements as if the old fortress itself were whispering secrets. Inside the great hall, the atmosphere was no less tense. Lord Alistair MacDermot, the aging master of the castle, had been found dead in his private study barely an hour earlier. The discovery had stunned the small gathering of guests who had come to Glenmore for what was meant to be a quiet weekend retreat. Inspector Douglas of the local constabulary stood near the fireplace, his boots still damp from the rain. His brow furrowed as he surveyed the room once again. "It makes no sense," he muttered. The study was small but richly furnished, dark oak shelves filled with books, a heavy desk positioned near the window, and a roaring fire that had now burned down to embers. Lord MacDermot sat slumped in his leather chair behind the desk, his head tilted slightly to one side. The doctor had already confirmed it. A single precise wound to the chest, delivered by a thin blade. Yet the true mystery was not the wound. The door to the study had been locked from the inside. The only window in the room was narrow and barred with iron rods set deep into the stone wall. The fireplace chimney was far too narrow for a person to pass through. In short, the killer had vanished. Inspector Douglas rubbed his chin as the castle's butler, Angus, stood stiffly near the doorway. "You're certain no one entered or left this room?" the inspector asked. "Yes, sir," Angus replied firmly. His lordship retired to the study around 8. I brought him tea at 8:30. He dismissed me, locked the door as was his habit, and that was the last anyone saw of him alive. And the guests? Miss Fiona MacDermot was in the music room. Captain Fraser was playing chess with Mr. Calloway in the library. Lady Winifred remained upstairs due to the storm. Douglas nodded slowly. Every one of them had an alibi, and yet Lord MacDermot was dead. He turned his attention back to the desk. There had been no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. It looked as though the old man had simply been sitting quietly when death arrived. But there was one peculiar detail. Resting on the polished surface of the desk was a small silver whistle. The inspector picked it up carefully with a handkerchief. It was a curious object, delicate, finely crafted, perhaps 2 inches long. The metal gleamed faintly in the firelight. "Does this belong to Lord MacDermot?" he asked. Angus frowned. "No, sir. I have never seen it before." Douglas turned the whistle over in his hand. There were no engravings, no initials, nothing that might reveal its owner. He placed it back down slowly. "Strange thing to find beside a dead man," he murmured. At that moment, the heavy doors of the great hall opened with a gust of wind. All eyes turned as a small figure stepped inside, brushing rain from the shoulders of his coat. The man removed his hat with precise care, revealing a perfectly groomed mustache. "Ah," he said pleasantly, glancing around the room. "It appears I have arrived at a most inconvenient moment." Inspector Douglas blinked in surprise. "You are the Hercule Poirot," the man replied with a polite bow. "At your service." The inspector stared. "The famous detective." Poirot gave a modest shrug. "I prefer to say a humble student of human nature. But yes, I have been known to assist when mysteries present themselves." Douglas hesitated before gesturing toward the study. "Well, Monsieur Poirot, we certainly have one." Poirot stepped inside the room slowly, his sharp eyes observing every detail. He examined the body first, leaning slightly forward. Then he looked at the locked door. Curious. He walked to the window and tapped the iron bars gently. Very secure. Finally, his gaze settled on the silver whistle resting on the desk. He picked it up delicately. Inspector Douglas folded his arms. "You see something important?" Poirot turned the whistle thoughtfully between his fingers. "My dear Inspector," he said softly, "in every mystery there is a voice." Douglas frowned. "A voice?" "Yeah." Poirot's eyes glinted. "And in this case, it appears the only witness is one that cannot speak." He raised the whistle slightly. "But sometimes," Poirot added quietly, "the silent witnesses tell us the most." Hercule Poirot stood very still in the study, the silver whistle balanced lightly between his fingers. The room was silent, except for the faint rattle of rain against the narrow window. Inspector Douglas watched him with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. "Well," the inspector said after a moment, "it's a whistle. Perhaps the killer dropped it." Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he placed the whistle back upon the desk exactly where he had found it, aligning it carefully with the edge of the polished wood. Then he stepped back and surveyed the entire room once more. "You say," he began quietly, "that Lord Macdermot locked this door himself after the tea was brought." "Yes," Douglas replied. "The butler is quite certain." Poirot nodded. His eyes drifted toward the chair where the old lord sat motionless. The wound was neat, precise, and oddly clean. "No struggle," Poirot murmured. "No overturned furniture. No sign that his lordship felt threatened." "He may have known the killer," Douglas suggested. "Possibly," Poirot agreed. "But even when one knows a visitor, one does not usually sit peacefully while being stabbed in the chest." The inspector frowned. Poirot stepped closer to the desk and examined the objects upon it. A leather-bound ledger, a fountain pen, a small brass letter opener, and a folded sheet of paper. "May I?" Poirot asked. Douglas gestured for him to proceed. Poirot unfolded the paper. It was blank. "Curious," he said softly. "What is?" the inspector asked. "This paper. It has been folded very recently." Douglas shrugged. Perhaps he intended to write a letter. Perhaps. Poirot held the sheet closer to the lamp. The paper bore the faintest indentation marks left by writing that had been done on another sheet above it. He smiled faintly, but said nothing. Instead, he moved slowly around the desk and studied the floor. Inspector Douglas watched as the detective suddenly crouched. "What have you found now?" Poirot pointed delicately. A small dark speck lay near the leg of the desk. Douglas bent closer. "Dust?" he asked. "No," Poirot said quietly. "Mud." "Mud? That's not surprising in weather like this." "Ah," Poirot replied, raising a finger. "But observe the color. It is not the reddish soil from the castle courtyard. This is darker, almost black." Douglas leaned closer. Indeed, the tiny fleck was nearly coal-colored. "From somewhere outside the grounds?" the inspector asked. "Possibly," Poirot said. He stood again, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. "Tell me, Inspector, this whistle. Has anyone here claimed it?" "Number. The butler swears he's never seen it, and the guests deny it belongs to them." Poirot glanced again at the small object on the desk. "Interesting." Just then the study door creaked slightly as Angus the butler appeared again. "Begging your pardon, gentlemen," he said stiffly. "Miss Fiona asks if there is any news." Poirot turned his head. "Miss Fiona Macdermot, the daughter of the deceased." "Yes, sir. Would she be so kind as to join us for a moment?" Angus nodded and withdrew. Inspector Douglas crossed his arms. "You think she knows something?" Poirot tilted his head thoughtfully. "I think," he said slowly, "that grief is sometimes accompanied by truth and sometimes by fear." Moments later, soft footsteps approached. Fiona Macdermot entered the study. She was pale, her dark hair loosely pinned, her eyes red from crying. She stopped when she saw her father. Poirot watched her closely. Her gaze moved first to the body, then to the desk, and finally to the silver whistle. For the briefest instant, something flickered across her face. Not grief. Recognition. Poirot's eyes sharpened. But just as quickly, the expression vanished. She clasped her hands tightly together. "Have you discovered who did this?" she asked quietly. Inspector Douglas shook his head. "Not yet, miss." Poirot stepped forward gently. "Mademoiselle," he said in a calm voice, "forgive the intrusion in such a difficult moment, but I must ask you something very simple." Her eyes turned toward him. Poirot gestured toward the desk. "Before tonight, had you ever seen that whistle?" Fiona's hands trembled as she shook her head. "No, I've never seen it before," she said softly, though her eyes lingered on the silver whistle in a way that betrayed her attempt at composure. Poirot's gaze did not waver. He observed the slightest quiver in her lips, the subtle tension in her shoulders. It was a small, almost invisible signal, but for him it was a language in itself. "Very well, mademoiselle," he said, his tone gentle but probing. "And yet you did not call for me immediately when the body was discovered." Fiona's brow furrowed. "I did not think it was necessary. I assumed Angus had already sent for someone." Poirot's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Ah, assumptions. they are often dangerous, and yet you came to me willingly now. Why? I wanted to help, she said, her voice slightly firmer. I want the truth about what happened to my father. Poirot inclined his head. Ah, but there are many kinds of truth, n'est-ce pas? Some are spoken, some are hidden, and some are told with clever deception. Inspector Douglas coughed lightly. Perhaps we should question the other guests while we were at it, he suggested. Poirot agreed. Yes, one must understand the movements of all present during the critical moments. They moved into the library, where Captain Fraser and Mr. Calloway were still seated, playing the interrupted game of chess. Fraser, a tall man with a military bearing, rose quickly at their arrival, offering a polite, almost rehearsed smile. I trust everything is under control, he asked, his tone carefully measured. Douglas frowned. We're still figuring that out, Captain. Poirot observed him quietly, stepping closer. Captain Fraser, may I inquire where you were between 8 and 9 this evening? Fraser's eyes flicked briefly to Calloway, as if seeking reassurance. As I told the inspector, I was here in the library. We were playing chess. My opponent can confirm. Calloway nodded, though his expression was taut. Yes, that is correct. I have no reason to lie. Poirot's eyes lingered on Calloway, noting the subtle twitch of his hand on the chessboard. Yet, mon ami, you hesitated ever so slightly. Timing is everything. Were you truly in the library the entire time? Calloway's jaw tightened. Yes, the entire time. I do not understand the implication. Poirot moved to the fireplace, glancing at the mantel where a small statuette had been slightly displaced, as if someone had brushed past it hurriedly. Ah, but objects sometimes speak when words are silent, he murmured. Inspector Douglas frowned. You're suggesting one of them moved around? Perhaps, Poirot said. Or perhaps they wish us to think so. His eyes swept the room, noting the faint smudges on the polished floorboards, the subtle disturbances in the dust. And yet, one must also consider motive. Who benefits from the death of Lord Macdermot? Fraser's hand tightened around his glass of brandy. We are all guests here. There is no motive, he protested, though the flush in his cheeks betrayed more than mere indignation. Poirot smiled slightly, not unkindly. Ah, but appearances can be deceiving, yes? Some people wish to appear innocent very convincingly, while hiding something altogether different. Douglas pinched the bridge of his nose. Poirot, are you saying everyone here is a suspect? I am saying, Poirot replied, that human nature is often contradictory. A hand that helps may also strike. A voice that comforts may also deceive. He turned toward the window, tapping the sill lightly. And then there are those who speak with hesitation or too much eagerness. It is in these subtleties that truth begins to emerge. Fiona, who had followed quietly, glanced at Poirot. But how can you tell? How can you see what we try to hide? Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. Ah, mademoiselle, the smallest gesture, the faintest pause, the slightest misplacement of an object. These are the voices of deception, and I listen carefully to all of them. Douglas glanced around the room. Well, perhaps we should continue questioning everyone thoroughly. If the truth is hidden, we need it unearthed. Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on Fraser and Calloway. But let us proceed with patience. The puzzle is complex, and each piece, however small, brings us closer to the final picture. Ah, but already I sense some pieces are not as they seem. He returned his attention to the whistle, now resting innocently on the desk, and for the first time a faint smile curved his lips. The silent witness waits, he whispered, almost to himself, and it knows much more than we suspect. Poirot returned to the study, his gaze sweeping the room once more with meticulous precision. He touched the silver whistle lightly, as if drawing information from its very surface, and then looked up at the assembled company. Mademoiselle Fiona, Captain Fraser, Mr. Calloway, each of you has presented a facade of innocence. Yet behind each facade I sense a story, a motive, and perhaps more than one. Fiona swallowed hard. But why would anyone want to harm my father? Ah, mademoiselle, Poirot replied, his voice soft yet probing. Human hearts are often twisted in ways even the family cannot perceive. Money, jealousy, fear, resentment. These are threads that can tangle the mind and lead to action most regrettable. Douglas glanced at him skeptically. "You think someone here killed for money?" "Possibly," Poirot said, circling the desk slowly. "Lord Macdermot's estate is considerable. Inheritance can inspire not only hope but also impatience. Yet money alone cannot explain everything. We must look deeper." He turned to Captain Fraser, who shifted uneasily. "Captain, you are a man of honor, yes? Yet you have been rather quick to confirm your alibi. Too quick, perhaps. Did you expect suspicion?" Fraser's jaw tightened. "I have nothing to hide." "Ah, but sometimes a man's eagerness to appear innocent is itself a clue," Poirot murmured, tapping the desk lightly. "And what of Mr. Calloway? You claim to have remained in the library, yet someone brushed past the statuette here, disturbing it just slightly. How does one account for that?" Calloway's expression hardened. "I had nothing to do with that. Perhaps someone entered when we were distracted." Poirot nodded slowly, though his eyes betrayed little patience for half-truths. "Perhaps. But then why deny even a momentary absence? Fear can compel silence as surely as guilt can. And what of you, mademoiselle? You lingered near the body, yes? And yet, when asked about the whistle, there was hesitation. Perhaps you recognized it or feared recognition?" Fiona's lips parted slightly, but she quickly closed them. I do not know of what you speak." "Ah, but one does not know what one does not recognize," Poirot said softly. "Or one chooses not to speak, and that is equally revealing." Inspector Douglas rubbed his forehead. "So far, all we have are vague suggestions and hints. How does this help?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Mon ami, we are not here to guess, but to assemble the pieces. Consider, each person present had the opportunity. Yes, each had a reason, even if unspoken. Captain Fraser is known to admire Lord Macdermot's position. Mr. Calloway's business dealings, questionable. And young Miss Fiona, though loyal, may have grievances hidden perhaps, but no less real. Fear, desire, resentment, all are motives woven together like threads in a tapestry." He moved toward the window, tapping gently on the sill. Outside, the storm had begun to ease, though the hills remained shrouded in mist. And then there is the matter of the whistle. It is small, unassuming, and yet placed deliberately. Whoever left it wished it to be found, but by whom? That is another layer, another question in this labyrinth of motives. Douglas looked uneasy. "You really think someone here planned this so carefully?" Poirot's eyes glimmered with quiet certainty. "Ah, yes. The careful killer leaves only what he wishes to be seen, and what he wishes to hide he hides most cunningly. Money, yes, but pride, fear, revenge, and jealousy, they are equally strong drivers. And in a house such as this, where walls have heard whispers for decades, all motives intertwine. One must untangle them, gently, methodically." He picked up a sheet of paper from the desk, noting the faint indentations. The puzzle grows more complex. Each piece seems unrelated, yet together they form a hidden pattern. A word misplaced here, a gesture unnoticed there, a hesitation. All these are strands connecting the suspects. One wrong move, one secret revealed, and the picture becomes clearer. But patience is essential. Fiona shivered slightly as Poirot looked at her with piercing eyes. "Soon, mademoiselle, the web of motives will no longer be invisible, and in that clarity, the truth will speak." Douglas glanced at Poirot, realizing that this was more than an investigation. It was a delicate orchestration of observation, inference, and understanding human nature. An intricate dance he was only beginning to comprehend. And somewhere, in the shadows of Glenmore Castle, the killer was still watching, perhaps confident, perhaps unaware that the silent witness, the small silver whistle, was already telling its own story. The following morning, a flurry of activity filled Glenmore Castle. Inspector Douglas, encouraged by what he believed was a crucial discovery, summoned the household and the remaining guests to the great hall. A glimmer of triumph shone in his eyes. "Gentlemen, ladies," he announced, "we have found the smoking gun. It appears the case is solved." Poirot, standing quietly near the fireplace, watched with calm detachment. He allowed Douglas to proceed. The breakthrough concerned the silver whistle. Overnight, a fingerprint analysis had revealed a match to Captain Fraser. The police concluded that the captain had secretly entered the study, committed the murder, and attempted to cover his tracks. Fraser's face paled. "This is preposterous," he protested. "I was here all evening. I did not touch that object. Douglas ignored him. "The evidence is clear. Case closed. Captain Fraser, you are under arrest." Gasps echoed through the hall. Fiona's hands flew to her mouth. Calloway's eyes widened, though he remained unnervingly still. Poirot, however, remained thoughtful, his fingers lightly stroking his mustache. As Fraser was led away in handcuffs, Poirot addressed the room. "A victory, yes, but a victory is not always what it seems." Douglas frowned. "What do you mean?" "The fingerprint proves it." "Ah, fingerprints, mon ami," Poirot said softly, "are only one form of evidence. They show presence, yes, but they do not explain intention. And intention is more elusive." Fiona looked at him, her eyes wide. "Are you saying he didn't do it?" Poirot inclined his head slowly. "I am saying, mademoiselle, that one must never accept the surface of a story. One must delve beneath. Observe the details others overlook." Douglas crossed his arms. "And what exactly are we overlooking?" Poirot's gaze drifted back to the study, to the desk, and of course, to the silver whistle. The whistle itself. Why would a killer leave such an object in plain sight? To mislead, to direct suspicion. And yet, the placement is too deliberate, too careful to be random. Someone wishes us to see it, but not in the way we think. He turned to Calloway, whose expression had grown increasingly tense. "Monsieur, a word." Calloway stepped forward reluctantly. Poirot's eyes scanned him, noting the subtle clenching of his fists, the faint lines of stress around his mouth. "You claimed to remain in the library the entire evening," Poirot began. "And yet the floorboards near the study show disturbance not accounted for." A shadow passed through. Calloway swallowed audibly. I did leave the library briefly, but I assure you it was nothing at all." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "But even the smallest movement leaves traces. You see, monsieur, the evidence you believe incriminates another is often a mirror reflecting the true culprit's craft." Douglas' face flushed with irritation. "You're saying we've arrested the wrong man?" Poirot nodded slightly. "The fingerprint on the whistle may have been planted. A clever deception, designed to lull the authorities into a false sense of victory." Fiona's hands trembled again. "Then the killer is still here." "Yes," Poirot said softly, "and they are patient. They have allowed themselves to fade into the shadows, confident that suspicion has been diverted elsewhere. But patience, though a useful tool for a criminal, can also be their undoing." Douglas let out a frustrated sigh. "So what now? We start again?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. "No, mon ami. We continue with greater observation, with keener attention. The threads of this deception are tangled, but each false lead only serves to reveal the careful mind behind them. One must not rush when the truth hides behind a mask." He picked up the whistle, holding it delicately as if weighing it in his hand. Soon he murmured, "The silent witness will speak again, and this time it will reveal what even the cleverest criminal cannot conceal." The hall was silent, save for the faint rumble of the storm outside. Douglas realized that, despite the apparent resolution, the case was far from over. Somewhere in Glenmore Castle, the true killer waited, confident, cunning, and unknowingly, a step closer to being unmasked by the keen eye of Hercule Poirot. Poirot spent the next hour alone in the study, moving quietly from one object to another, his fingers brushing lightly over the desk, the ledger, and the bookshelves. Each item seemed ordinary, yet he observed with the precision of a man who could read the past in the dust. His mind worked silently, threading together subtle inconsistencies, the hesitations he had noted in conversation, and the faint traces of movement around the room. Then his eyes fell upon the ledger. It was a record of recent expenditures and correspondence, mostly mundane, yet a single entry caught his attention. A small payment, months earlier, made to a Mr. Calloway, an unusual sum, recorded under the vague heading settlement. Poirot leaned closer, his eyebrows knitting together. The detective suddenly recalled something he had learned the previous day. Mr. Calloway, though outwardly a polite guest, had a past in business disputes that occasionally ended in scandal. And Captain Fraser, though seemingly upright, had once been involved in a minor but bitter quarrel with Lord Macdermot over a shared investment. Individually, these facts seemed trivial. Together, they formed a pattern that no one had yet noticed. Poirot's eyes shifted to the fireplace, where ash had been disturbed in a corner. A faint trace of old paper crumbled there, as if someone had attempted to destroy correspondence. He retrieved it carefully. The fragments revealed only a few words: "Never forgive, secrets long buried, payback." Even in their fragmentary state, they hinted at an old grievance that had never faded. A thought struck him. He returned to the ledger, examining the handwriting of the payments. There was a peculiar similarity between the ink of the settlement and the note on the fragments. Someone had been trying to settle an old debt and someone else had kept it alive, perhaps nurturing resentment for months, even years. Fiona's voice, faint in the corridor, called softly, "Monsieur Poirot." He did not respond immediately, his attention caught by a subtle detail: the arrangement of books on the top shelf. 2 volumes were shifted slightly, revealing a small slip of paper wedged between them. It bore the name Fraser in neat, careful handwriting, along with a date 3 years prior, a letter or perhaps a warning long forgotten, now resurfacing. Poirot smiled faintly to himself. "Ah, the past," he murmured. "It has a way of lingering, unseen yet decisive." He called for Inspector Douglas. The officer arrived, still smarting from the premature arrest of Captain Fraser. Poirot gestured to the slip and the fragments of paper. "You see, mon ami, the crime is not born of this moment alone. It has its roots in grievances old and patient, like seeds lying dormant in winter soil, waiting for the right conditions to bloom." Douglas frowned. "So the suspects are connected by past incidents?" "Exactly," Poirot said. "Captain Fraser's quarrel with Lord Macdermot, Mr. Calloway's secret settlements, and even the unspoken resentments of Miss Fionn are threads in the same tapestry. Individually, they seem harmless together. They form the motive, the hidden architecture of vengeance and fear." Fiona entered quietly, drawn by the discussion. Poirot regarded her kindly, but seriously. "Mademoiselle, do you recall, in your father's correspondence, any mention of disputes long ago? Friends turned rivals, business disagreements, small betrayals that were never spoken of?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, there was a disagreement years ago about an estate investment. I remember my father arguing with both Captain Fraser and Mr. Calloway about it, but I thought it was over." "Ah," Poirot said, with a faint nod. "And therein lies the trap. We all see only what seems current, yet the past whispers in every gesture, every choice, every hidden object. The crime is never merely the act, it's the culmination of years of subtle provocations, carefully concealed bitterness." Douglas rubbed his temples. "So the real killer exploited the past and planted false evidence to mislead us." Poirot smiled faintly, tapping the silver whistle, still resting on the desk. "Exactly, mon ami. The past is never dead. It lingers in the shadows, and those shadows guide the hand of the guilty. Now, with these threads in hand, we may finally begin to see the design behind the chaos, and follow it to its inevitable conclusion." Outside, the mist hung low over Glenmore Castle, as if the hills themselves were guarding secrets that had slumbered for years. Inside, Poirot's keen mind raced quietly, unraveling connections hidden to all others, and preparing to illuminate the truth that had long waited in silence. Poirot returned to the study, where the silver whistle still gleamed innocently on the desk. He placed it carefully in front of him and clasped his hands. Then, turning to Fiona, Captain Fraser, and Mr. Calloway, he adopted a calm, deliberate tone, the kind that suggested both patience and authority. "Mes amis," he began, "sometimes the human mind reveals its secrets not through words, but through reaction. The truth is clever it hides, yes, but also it trembles when approached in the correct manner. One must merely provide a gentle stimulus." The 3 guests exchanged uneasy glances. Douglas, standing off to the side, frowned. "You mean psychological tricks?" Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Exactly. A carefully designed suggestion, a subtle test of character, and often the smallest gesture will betray what the tongue refuses to speak." He picked up the silver whistle and held it lightly between his fingers. "I am told this object belongs to no one present, and yet the one who placed it here had purpose. Now, let us see what happens if we suggest a scenario." Poirot's eyes met Fraser's first. "Captain, let us imagine that the authorities had not yet arrived, that the study had remained empty for some time after the unfortunate event, and imagine, too, that you were the one who entered afterward. What would you do with an object that might implicate another? Fraser's hands tightened around the arms of his chair. He flushed slightly, his composed military demeanor cracking just enough to reveal a flicker of unease. I don't understand what you mean. Poirot's eyes sparkled faintly. Ah, yes, but you do. Even the slightest hesitation speaks volumes, and it is precisely the hesitation that interests me. Then he turned toward Calloway. Monsieur, in such a scenario, would you act differently? Perhaps by planting evidence or by removing it. Would you attempt to divert suspicion, or to conceal a certain detail that should not be seen? Calloway's mouth tightened, his gaze flicking instinctively toward the whistle. He swallowed audibly, a subtle tremor running through his fingers. I would have no reason to touch anything, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. But the mind is not so easily deceived, n'est-ce pas? A crack appears in the most carefully constructed facade. Observe, Inspector Douglas, how the mere suggestion of circumstance without accusation elicits the truth hidden beneath. He returned his attention to Fiona. Mademoiselle, let us consider your own reaction. You were close to the body when discovered, yes. And the whistle, did it seem familiar in any way? Fiona hesitated, glancing at the object as if seeing it for the first time. Her hands clasped instinctively. I thought I recognized it, but I cannot be sure. Perhaps it belonged to someone visiting years ago. Poirot's eyes twinkled knowingly. Exactly. And that flicker of recognition, it is enough. It is often the unspoken acknowledgement that reveals more than words ever could. He paused, letting silence hang in the room, allowing each guest to absorb the implications. Sometimes, to uncover deception, one must employ an unconventional method. Not accusation, not interrogation, but suggestion, subtlety, and observation of what emerges involuntarily. And now, we see a faint tremor in each mind, revealing what they would otherwise conceal. Douglas's eyebrows shot up. So you're saying the reactions themselves point to the guilty party? Poirot inclined his head. Yes. A subtle anxiety here, a hesitation there, a flicker of recognition. All these are the footprints of the guilty mind. The object itself, small and unassuming, acts as a catalyst. The whistle is not merely evidence. It is a key that unlocks hidden responses. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. And when these responses are carefully observed, mes amis, one can begin to map the path of deception. Already, a pattern is emerging, though it remains delicate, like frost on a window pane. But soon the ice will crack, and the truth will shine clearly through. The room remained tense, each suspect uneasy under Poirot's unwavering scrutiny. Outside, the mist shifted in the highlands, as if the hills themselves were whispering, waiting for the precise moment when the invisible threads of the crime would finally unravel. Poirot, ever patient, knew that the final revelation was only a matter of time, and that the unconventional clue he had employed tonight had brought him one step closer to the truth hidden in the shadows of Glenmore Castle. The following afternoon, Poirot returned to the study with a renewed sense of purpose. He had spent the morning carefully reviewing the subtle reactions he had observed, the fragments of letters, and the ledger entries, mapping in his mind the intricate web connecting Fraser, Calloway, and Fiona. The silver whistle remained on the desk, a silent sentinel in the midst of chaos. Inspector Douglas arrived shortly after, carrying a small evidence bag. "I've brought the fingerprint report," he said, setting it down on the desk. We can finally confirm Poirot's sharp eyes fell on the bag and then on the report itself. His brow furrowed slightly. Mon Dieu, it is gone. Douglas blinked. Gone? What do you mean, gone? The bag, Poirot said calmly, but with a growing edge of concern. It was here a moment ago, and now the report has vanished. Douglas looked around frantically. The desk was undisturbed, save for the whistle still in its place. Are you sure? Perhaps you misplaced it? Poirot shook his head. None. I was meticulous. I handled it myself. The evidence is missing. Someone has removed it. Fiona, who had just entered with a tray of tea, froze. Stolen? She whispered. Or destroyed, Poirot said quietly. Either way, the case has gained a new level of complication. A tense silence fell over the room. Douglas ran his hand over his hair. This is impossible. Who would risk taking evidence from the police? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Someone who fears the truth. Someone who has reason to manipulate the course of investigation before it is too late. He moved to the window, staring out into the mist-shrouded courtyard. And notice this. The removal is subtle, precise. No sign of forced entry, no broken locks. Only someone who is patient, observant, and clever enough to know exactly when and how to act. Douglas paced the room. So we've lost the report. Does this mean Captain Fraser could walk free? Poirot's gaze returned to the whistle. It means that the game has changed. The guilty party is aware of our progress and has taken steps to impede us. Trust, mon ami, has become fragile. And every word spoken, every movement made, must now be measured against the possibility of deception. He turned to Fiona. Mademoiselle, the person who removed the evidence may still be among us. Observe them gently, as before. Often one's own fear betrays the path to truth. Fiona's lips pressed together. But how can we catch someone so careful? Poirot smiled faintly, the slightest curve of his mustache betraying amusement. Patience and attention, mademoiselle. Those who believe themselves beyond observation often leave traces small, almost imperceptible. The removal of this report itself is a message, a challenge, and an error, if one knows how to see it. Douglas ran a hand over the mantelpiece nervously. We'll need to guard everything now. No one leaves the castle, no objects move without supervision. Poirot nodded. Yes, precautions are necessary. And yet, observe carefully, Douglas. Panic and overcaution can mislead as surely as clever deceit. The guilty mind does not always act perfectly. He bent over the desk, resting his hands lightly on its polished surface. The stolen evidence may have been intended to halt our investigation, but in truth, it has revealed a new truth. The killer is watching, maneuvering, and perhaps impatient to act again. The stakes have risen. Every second now matters, and every small detail, no matter how insignificant it appears, may be the key that unlocks the final revelation. Fiona shivered as the room seemed to close in around them. Outside, the mist thickened over Glenmore Castle, and Poirot's gaze flicked once more to the silver whistle. The tiny object remained still, but Poirot knew better. In its silence lay a truth that no thief could remove, no deception could conceal. The case was far from over, and the shadows of those who moved unseen had grown longer. The evening descended over Glenmore Castle like a heavy curtain, and the mist in the courtyard had thickened to a near-impenetrable grey. Poirot stood in the study, the silver whistle still resting innocently on the desk, when a sharp, urgent knock echoed from the hallway. Inspector Douglas rushed to the door, only to return a moment later, pale and unsettled. "Monsieur Poirot, it's Fiona," he said, voice trembling slightly. "She's gone." Poirot's eyes narrowed, a faint crease appearing across his brow. "Gone? You mean she disappeared from her room?" Douglas nodded. "Yes. I found the door unlocked, the window ajar, but no sign of her anywhere. It's as if she vanished into thin air." Poirot stepped quickly to the window and peered into the dense mist outside. Footprints led from the window toward the edge of the garden, but they abruptly ended. Someone had clearly carried her away, or she had been lured into a trap with utmost care. "Mes amis," Poirot said quietly, turning to Douglas, "we are no longer dealing merely with the residue of an old crime or a stolen piece of evidence. The culprit is bold. They are acting, and they know we are watching. This is now an attempt to control the course of events by fear." Douglas ran his hands through his hair. A kidnapping? But who would do this? And why? Poirot's eyes swept the room, lingering on the displaced objects, the still-polished floorboards, the faint ash disturbed by invisible fingers. The answer, mon ami, lies in understanding the mind of the criminal. Whoever took Mademoiselle Fiona is clever, patient, and ruthless. They have now escalated the stakes. They want to intimidate us, perhaps to mislead us, or to prevent the uncovering of truth hidden in the past. Douglas frowned. "So the person behind my captain's supposed crime is still at large, and now this." Poirot nodded. "Yes." "And the theft of the fingerprint report was merely the first act in a sequence designed to unsettle us. Now they have demonstrated that they can move freely within the castle, striking when they see an opening. A sudden noise from the hallway made them both tense. Footsteps, cautious but deliberate, echoed from above. Poirot moved silently to the top of the stairs, signaling Douglas to stay back. The shadows of the corridor shifted, and for a fleeting moment he glimpsed a figure moving swiftly toward the tower wing. "Monsieur," Douglas whispered, "do you think she's still alive?" Poirot's face remained calm, but his eyes were sharp. "It is difficult to say, but consider this: if the culprit wished her harmed immediately, it would have been done. No, they are patient, strategic. This is a warning, but it is also an opportunity to observe, to anticipate, to act decisively before more damage occurs." He turned to Douglas, his voice firm. "We must split our attention. Guards must secure the known exits, but our focus should be on the subtle signs, the disturbed objects, the footprints, the whisperings of movement that betray presence. The criminal is several steps ahead, yes, but even the most careful mind leaves traces. We must watch and wait and strike at the precise moment." Douglas nodded, a chill running down his spine. "And if we fail?" Poirot's gaze rested once more on the silver whistle. "Then the consequences will be grave. But I do not fail, mon ami. The pieces are still in motion, and the mind that orchestrates this has underestimated the power of observation, patience, and deduction. Mademoiselle Fiona's fate is linked to the same threads that created this web. Follow the threads, Douglas, and we shall uncover the truth before the next move is made." Outside, the mist swirled ominously over the castle grounds, and somewhere within its folds the villain moved, confident and unseen. Poirot, as always, was already several steps ahead, his mind weaving possibilities and preparing to meet the challenge that had suddenly taken the investigation from mystery to peril. Poirot paced slowly along the study floor, his eyes scanning every corner, every object, as though the very walls might whisper secrets if he looked closely enough. The storm outside had quieted to a steady drizzle, yet inside Glenmore Castle, tension lingered like a thick fog. He turned the silver whistle over in his fingers once more, noting the faint scratches along its polished surface. It was small, inconsequential to most, yet he had long suspected that it was far from an ordinary trinket. Inspector Douglas entered the room, brushing rain from his coat. "Monsieur Poirot, we've searched the grounds, the tower, the servants' quarters. Nothing. Fiona is nowhere to be found." Poirot did not look up. "Patience, Douglas. The chaos itself conceals order. One merely must discern the rhythm beneath the apparent disorder." Douglas frowned. "Rhythm?" "Yes," Poirot said, finally turning to face him, his eyes glinting. "Observe closely, mon ami. Every action of the guilty mind leaves a mark, and in this castle the marks are subtle, almost imperceptible, yet consistent. The footsteps, the displaced objects, the whispered words all create a pattern." He walked to the fireplace and knelt, inspecting the ash. A faint smudge caught his eye too deliberately to be accidental. He traced it with his finger. Here, for instance, someone left a mark while handling the documents, but care was taken to avoid obvious disturbance elsewhere. It is a signature of thought, not haste. It suggests meticulous planning, yet also reliance on misdirection. Douglas tilted his head. "You mean the thief and the kidnapper are the same?" "Yes. And now we begin to see the method behind the madness. Small details, long ignored, begin to fit together." Poirot moved to the desk and picked up the pen, examining its position. "Consider this. The pen was slightly misaligned with the ledger. Most would overlook it. Yet it corresponds exactly with the angle of the silver whistle when first found. A careless observer would see only coincidence. But coincidence, in the hands of a careful mind, is never random." He tapped the ledger with his knuckles. "And the ledger itself, payments, settlements, entries, each one tied to a subtle reaction from our guests. The hesitation of Mr. Calloway when questioned about the ledger, the flicker of recognition in Fiona's eyes when shown the whistle, all these elements now converge. They form a trail, a sequence, and, ultimately, a clue to the orchestrator's identity." Douglas blinked. "So all this time, the key has been right under our noses." "Precisely," Poirot said, a faint smile curling his mustache. "The human mind is drawn to the grand gestures, the dramatic reveals. Yet the truth often hides in the mundane, the overlooked, the ordinary, like the scratch on the whistle, the misaligned pen, the faintest smudge in the ash. These are the footprints left by someone confident in their control, yet unaware that the most observant eyes can follow them. He stood, his gaze sweeping the room. And now, Douglas, we can anticipate the next move. The pattern tells us not only who is guilty, but also where they are likely to act next. The small, consistent choices, repeated across time and space, reveal the strategy. Even the disappearance of Mademoiselle Fiona is not random, it's part of a rhythm, a sequence that can be read if one is patient enough. Poirot's eyes rested on the window, where the mist still clung to the Highland hills. "See, mon ami, it has been here all along." The answer was never hidden in the grand gestures, the false leads, or the stolen evidence. It was embedded in subtlety, in the ordinary, in that which others dismissed as inconsequential. And once one sees the pattern, the chaos transforms into clarity. Douglas let out a slow breath. Then we know where to focus. We can predict their next step. Poirot's expression was serene, yet electrified with anticipation. Douglas. The pattern is clear, the threads are visible, and the time has come to act. For the first time, the rhythm of the crime guides us, and the hand of the guilty cannot escape the vigilance that has been trained upon it. The silent witness has spoken, and now we follow its direction. Outside, the mist swirled over the castle grounds, but inside, a new order had begun to emerge. The pieces were aligning, and for the first time, Poirot glimpsed the shape of the truth hidden in plain sight all along, yet awaiting the careful eye to reveal it. Poirot stood silently in the study, his eyes fixed on the silver whistle, as if the tiny object alone could illuminate the darkness surrounding the case. The pattern he had discerned the previous evening now coalesced into something tangible, a rhythm, a sequence, a chain of reasoning no one else had yet perceived. He beckoned Inspector Douglas closer, speaking in low, precise tones. "Mon ami, we have observed gestures, hesitations, and misaligned objects. We have noted the disappearances and the subtle manipulations of evidence. Yet the pattern is not merely a sequence of actions, it is a window into the mind of the guilty." Douglas listened, tense and expectant. Poirot's eyes glinted with quiet satisfaction. "Observe carefully. The theft of the fingerprint report, the disappearance of Mademoiselle Fiona, the planted clues, all were designed to mislead us. But why these specific acts, and why now? It is not avarice, nor simple revenge. Those motives are pedestrian. The mind that orchestrates these events seeks something far deeper." He moved to the desk and gestured to the ledger, the pen, and the scattered letters. "The entries we have examined, payments, settlements, disputes, are indeed relevant, but they are only a mask. Behind them lies a personal obsession, a fixation that has guided every calculated step of the crime. Consider the reactions, the flicker of recognition in Fiona's eyes, Calloway's subtle tremor, Fraser's forced composure. Each reveals a mind tied not merely to gain, but to a compulsion of psychological need to control, manipulate, and dominate the very environment in which they dwell." Douglas frowned. "You mean the killer isn't just after money or revenge? They enjoy the act itself?" Poirot said, nodding. "There is satisfaction in orchestrating fear, in watching the chaos unfold. This is not a crime of circumstance, it is a crime of psychology, cultivated over time. The individual seeks to impose their will, to test the responses of others, and to confirm their own supremacy in the quiet theater of manipulation." He paced slowly, each step deliberate. The silver whistle, small and unassuming, is emblematic. It was not left merely as a clue or a misdirection. It is a token of control, a symbol that the perpetrator believes themselves to be the unseen conductor of events. The disappearance of Fiona was not motivated by haste or revenge. It was a calculated measure to demonstrate power and to elicit reactions from those who might interfere with the carefully constructed plan. Douglas shook his head, incredulous. "So this person has been orchestrating everything just to prove something to themselves?" Poirot's gaze softened slightly, yet remained piercing. "Yes. And now we understand why they were willing to go to such extremes. Each step-by-step planted clue, every stolen report, every subtle observation is a reflection of the criminal's inner world, the need to dominate, to create fear, to observe human nature under pressure, and to manipulate it for personal gratification. Money and resentment were merely convenient veils, tools to conceal a far more disturbing truth. Fiona, who had returned quietly to the room, drew a shaky breath. So it wasn't about my father's estate at all. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Non, mademoiselle. That was a distraction. The true motive is psychological, obsession with control, and the satisfaction derived from orchestrating fear and uncertainty. The crime is a reflection of the perpetrator's mind, not merely the world outside. Douglas ran a hand over his face. Then this person is dangerous in ways we didn't even anticipate. They're not just willing to kill, they're willing to manipulate, to toy with everyone, to bend reality to their will. Exactly, Poirot said, eyes glinting. And that understanding changes everything. To anticipate the next move, we must think like them, see the world through the lens of their compulsion. Only then can we prevent further harm, and only then can the threads of this intricate crime be fully unraveled. He lifted the silver whistle, examining the faint scratches along its surface. It is small, innocuous, yet it holds the key. The mind behind these actions has left signs everywhere, subtle, deliberate, a hidden signature of psychology. And now, mon ami, we are ready to read it completely, for the first time, and confront the person who has made Glenmore Castle a theatre of fear. Outside, the mist rolled over the highlands like a living entity, and within the castle, Poirot's gaze burned with the clarity of insight. The hidden motive had been revealed, and the path to the culprit, the person who had manipulated events with such cold precision, was finally coming into view. Poirot moved with quiet deliberation through the dimly lit corridors of Glenmore Castle, the faint smell of rain and wet stone clinging to the air. The household had been instructed to remain in their rooms under the pretense of an ongoing search for Mademoiselle Fiona. In truth, Poirot had already deduced the identity of the culprit and now required only the final step, to draw them into a position where truth would reveal itself. He entered the grand hall, where the silver whistle had been placed once more on the central table, gleaming under the low candlelight. Its small, polished surface seemed almost to pulse with quiet anticipation, as though it too had been a willing participant in the trap. Poirot gestured for Inspector Douglas to stay close but silent. "Observe, mon ami. Everything is in place. The stage is set, and the actor will arrive shortly." Minutes passed, tense and silent, until faint footsteps echoed in the distance. A shadow flitted along the edge of the hallway, too careful, too measured. Poirot's sharp eyes caught the glint of something metallic in that hand, and he smiled ever so slightly. The criminal had come to investigate, or perhaps to attempt another manipulation. "Good evening, Monsieur Calloway," Poirot said softly, stepping into the light, his voice calm yet commanding. Calloway froze, the metallic object a letter opener, silver and shining in his hand. Poirot continued, unhurried. "You thought the pattern could be concealed forever. You believed that by stealing reports, manipulating evidence, and orchestrating fear, your secret would remain buried. But the threads have led me to you. Every hesitation, every misalignment, every flicker of recognition, all pointed to a single mind. Yours." Calloway's eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape. "You can't prove anything," he hissed, his voice tight. "Those letters, the payments, it's all circumstantial. I've done nothing at all." Poirot's gaze remained steady, unflinching. "Ah, but circumstantial, mon ami, is precisely where you erred. The human mind betrays itself in ways even the cleverest cannot prevent. The silver whistle, the ash smudges, the ledger entries, your reactions each a subtle signature of intent. You believed yourself invisible, yet invisible you were not." Calloway's hand twitched toward the letter opener. Poirot's eyes, calm and sharp, followed the movement. One last act of desperation, perhaps. It is unnecessary. Your victory, if it ever existed, is already over. The evidence you sought to hide, the fear you wished to wield, it has led us here. For a fleeting moment, Calloway faltered, uncertainty flickering across his face. Poirot stepped closer, his voice gentle yet inexorably firm. "Mademoiselle Fiona is unharmed. She is safe, waiting quietly in the servants' wing, protected from your design. But every action you have taken, every manipulation has been recorded, observed, and understood." Calloway's grip on the letter opener loosened imperceptibly. "You You don't understand. I had to... To show them Yes, Poirot said softly, almost sympathetically, to demonstrate control, to orchestrate fear, to confirm your own dominance. But the mind that manipulates others is rarely free from the consequences of its own design. Observe, monsieur, how a web of deception, no matter how carefully woven, inevitably reveals the hand that created it. Calloway sank into the nearest chair, the tension leaving his shoulders as he realized the futility of further resistance. The letter opener clattered to the floor, and with it, the last vestige of bravado dissolved. His eyes met Poirot's, wide with reluctant acknowledgement. "Very well," he murmured, voice hollow. I admit it. I planned everything. The whistle, the letters, the false leads, it was all me." Poirot inclined his head, serene yet commanding. "Yes. And now, mon ami, you are in the custody of the law, and the truth has emerged from the shadows. It is a truth that was visible all along, if one had only the patience to see it." Outside, the mist continued to drift over the highlands, but inside Glenmore Castle, a quiet resolution settled. The final confrontation had been achieved, the villain unmasked, and the intricate design of fear and deception laid bare before the unwavering eye of Hercule Poirot. The stage was cleared, the danger ended, and the silent witness, the small silver whisperer, rested once more. A quiet testament to the victory of observation, deduction, and patience. The castle seemed to exhale as Calloway was led away, his confession echoing faintly down the stone corridors. Poirot, standing beside the silver whistle, allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The pattern had been revealed, the hidden motive exposed, and the villain apprehended. Yet, as always, he trusted instinct above the illusion of closure. He turned toward Douglas, who looked relieved, though still tense. "So, is it finally over?" the inspector asked. Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept the room. "Douglas, one must never accept the finality of a confession without first examining the silence that remains. Observe carefully. Even in the satisfaction of resolution, a small anomaly persists." Douglas frowned. "An anomaly? What do you mean?" Poirot knelt, inspecting the desk where the whistle had rested. His fingers traced the surface lightly, pausing at a faint indentation, almost imperceptible. "Notice this, mon ami. The pressure of the fingertips Calloway's. Perhaps, or someone else." Douglas' brow furrowed. "Someone else? But he confessed. The case is solved." Poirot straightened, his expression a mixture of calm and intensity. Yeah. But confession does not always reveal the entirety of truth. Sometimes it reveals what the confessor believes will satisfy others. Yet the mind that orchestrates events often leaves a deeper signature, hidden beneath layers of misdirection. He rose and approached the fireplace, eyes scanning the shadows. A subtle crease in the edge of a carpet caught his attention. A fold, slightly unnatural, as if something had been tucked beneath it. Poirot crouched and lifted the corner, revealing a small, folded note. The handwriting was elegant, precise, yet unmistakably distinct from Calloway's. He unfolded it carefully. The words were brief, chilling in their clarity. "The game is not yet done. Observe closely, or all will be lost." Douglas stared at him, alarmed. "What is this? Another accomplice?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Perhaps, Douglas, or perhaps the mind behind all events has been more cunning than we imagined. Calloway confessed to the visible acts, but someone else may have guided him, tested him, ensured the sequence of events unfolded exactly as intended. The whistle, the ledger, the stolen reports, they were all instruments, and the hand conducting the orchestra may yet remain unseen." Fiona, who had quietly entered the room again, shivered. "Do you mean someone is still in the castle?" Poirot inclined his head subtly. "It is possible, mademoiselle. Or perhaps the mastermind has already departed, leaving Calloway to bear the blame and the echoes of their manipulation behind. Either way, the lesson is clear. The surface of truth can never be trusted alone. One must always consider the currents beneath." Douglas ran a hand over his face. "So all of this, the danger, the fear, the disappearance, it might not be completely resolved." "Exactly," Poirot said softly, stepping closer to the whistle. "The confession resolves the immediate acts, but the subtle manipulations, the psychological choreography, may yet reveal another layer. One must remain vigilant, for the cleverest criminals do not act openly, they create a series of mirrors, reflections designed to confuse the observer until the final truth is revealed. He paused, letting the words sink in. This final note, he said, holding it delicately, is a message and a challenge. It tells us that even in apparent resolution, one must question, observe, and deduce. The real mastermind, if indeed there is one, is patient, clever, and always watching. The castle may seem calm now, yet the mind that orchestrated this drama may still be several steps ahead. The three of them stood in silence, the mist pressing against the windows as though it carried secrets from the hills. Poirot's gaze lingered on the silver whistle, small, unassuming, yet central to the entire chain of events. In its silence, he sensed the quiet pulse of a challenge yet to be met, a final test of observation, intellect, and patience. And in that moment, he knew that while one act of justice had been achieved, the ultimate truth, hidden in plain sight, had not yet fully revealed itself. The candlelight flickered across the study as Poirot gathered the small pieces of evidence once more: the silver whistle, the ledger, the fragments of letters. Each had played its part in the intricate dance of deception, and now, in the quiet aftermath, he could see the design in its entirety. Inspector Douglas and Fiona watched him intently, sensing that the final revelation was near. Poirot held the silver whistle between his fingers, turning it slowly. Messames, we have followed the threads, observed the patterns, and deduced the hidden motives. Calloway confessed, yes, but the mind behind the orchestration, the one who truly sought to dominate this theater of fear, was not him. The confessor was a pawn, guided by subtle manipulations, and yet even he left traces of the greater hand. Douglas leaned forward. You mean? The real villain escaped. Poirot's gaze was steady, almost serene. Yes, escaped, but not without leaving the signature of their presence. Observe the misaligned pen, the faint smudge in the ash. The stolen reports all point to someone calculating, clever, patient, and highly familiar with the castle. Calloway carried out the acts, but the unseen hand ensured they followed a precise sequence, leaving just enough trail to mislead investigators and yet reveal a pattern only to the most observant eye. He walked slowly to the fireplace, where the shadows seemed to shift with the wind outside. The note discovered under the carpet confirms this. The game is not yet done, it says. A message, yes, but also a warning. The true orchestrator is satisfied with the outcomes achieved, yet confident that they remain beyond detection. The visible crime is concluded, the hidden manipulation is not. Fiona shivered, clutching her shawl. So someone could still be in the castle, or they could have left entirely, and we wouldn't know? Poirot inclined his head. Precisely. The brilliance of the design lies in its invisibility. The master manipulator counted on fear, on distraction, on the misdirection created by human expectation. All the chaos, the disappearance, the theft, the false leads was intended to guide attention away from the ultimate truth. That control was never in Calloway's hands. He was merely a participant in a carefully choreographed performance. Douglas ran his hands over the back of his neck. And the whistle? The ledger? The letters? Poirot smiled faintly. They were instruments, clues deliberately placed for observation. The whistle, small and unassuming, provoked recognition. The ledger and letters created a sequence that led the observant eye to the pattern. Most would dismiss these as trivial, but it is in the mundane that genius often hides. He turned to both of them, the weight of authority in his gaze unmistakable. Justice, in the conventional sense, has been delivered to Calloway, who acted upon the instructions and temptations provided. Yet the mind that orchestrated the events has vanished into the fog of the Scottish Highlands, leaving only the echo of its design. And this, mes amis, is a lesson. The surface of truth may satisfy the untrained eye, but only meticulous observation, reasoning, and attention to subtlety reveal the full architecture of a crime. Fiona exhaled, a mixture of relief and unease. So, we won, but not completely. Poirot folded his hands calmly. Yes, the immediate threat is neutralized, the guilty have been restrained. Yet the genius who guided them, they remain at liberty. It is a reminder that the human mind, when clever and unscrupulous, can escape even the most thorough of investigations. And yet, It is also proof of the value of observation, deduction, and the understanding that the smallest detail, when seen, can illuminate the entire mystery. The mist outside curled against the castle walls, and for a long moment silence fell over Glenmore. Poirot's eyes rested on the silver whistle, now quietly still. He smiled, faint and knowing, for the invisible hand that had orchestrated so much had left traces, and in those traces lay the knowledge that the world, though imperfectly controlled, could still be read by the sharpest mind. Justice had been served, at least in part, and as always, Poirot was already several steps ahead, watching, calculating, prepared for whatever came next. The first light of dawn seeped through the tall windows of Glenmore Castle, casting a pale, silvery glow across the study. Poirot stood by the hearth, the silver whistle resting quietly in its place on the polished desk, and watched as the mist began to lift from the highlands beyond. Inspector Douglas and Fiona moved about the room, tidying papers and exchanging relieved glances, yet the air was far from ordinary calm. Poirot sensed its subtle, nearly imperceptible, a tension that lingered beneath the surface. "Mes amis," he said softly, almost to himself, "we have concluded the visible events, unravelled the pattern, and brought immediate justice to the one who acted in the foreground. Yet, there is always a shadow beyond the light of what is seen." Douglas raised an eyebrow. "You mean the mastermind who remains free?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Not only that, mon ami. Even beyond the known orchestrator, there are questions that remain, subtle whispers of intent hidden in plain sight. Consider the note under the carpet. The words were deliberate, yes, but why was it placed there, and what does it truly signify? Was it simply a taunt, or a breadcrumb pointing to a larger plan yet unrevealed? Fiona approached cautiously, glancing at the whistle. "So, the case isn't entirely closed." Poirot's gaze lingered on the small object. "It is closed only in terms of the immediate acts. But the mind capable of such orchestration does not act in isolation, nor does it leave the world unchanged. The tiny scratches, the faint smudge in the ash, the alignment of the ledger, these are traces of intent. And intent, once left, rarely disappears entirely. It lingers like a footprint on soft earth, waiting to be read by one who knows how to see." Douglas ran a hand across his brow. "You're saying there's more? Another layer we haven't uncovered?" "Perhaps Poirot said, turning to survey the room, each object carefully considered in his sharp, calculating gaze. "It may be subtle overlooked letter, a misheard word, a hesitation in a witness, but it exists. The human mind, particularly one devoted to manipulation and control, leaves a signature that is almost always observable if one pays attention. And Glenmore Castle, with its history, its hidden passages, and its shadows, is fertile ground for secrets yet unrevealed." He walked slowly to the door, his steps measured, the faint echo blending with the rising wind outside. "One must also consider the psychology of those who act behind the scenes. Even when their immediate plans fail, their motives remain, simmering quietly, waiting for opportunity. The confessions we obtained resolve only the present danger. But the possibility of new schemes, new tests of observation persists." Fiona looked uneasy. "You mean someone could strike again?" Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the threat is intellectual, rather than physical, a test, a puzzle left deliberately to engage the mind. What is certain, mademoiselle, is that a careful observer cannot ignore the faintest clue, for it may herald events yet to come. The mystery never truly ends, it merely rests, waiting for the right moment to awaken once more." Douglas exhaled, a mix of relief and unease in his expression. "So the danger is gone, but not completely gone." "Exactly," Poirot said, lifting the whistle in his hand one last time, its polished surface catching the early sunlight. "We have seen the visible acts, deduced the hidden motives, and traced the threads of deception. Yet there remains a question, a small anomaly that does not fit perfectly, a quiet signature of intellect unaccounted for. It is a question for another day, a puzzle awaiting its observer." He placed the whistle back on the desk and straightened, turning to leave the study. Outside, the mist had receded further, revealing the rolling hills of the Scottish Highlands, bathed in pale morning light. Poirot's steps echoed softly in the corridors as he moved toward the entrance, leaving Douglas and Fiona behind, both relieved and unsettled. The castle seemed peaceful, yet Poirot knew the truth. Mysteries rarely end. They linger in the subtle details, in the shadows of the mind, in the small clues that wait patiently to be noticed. And as he stepped into the crisp morning air, he allowed himself a faint, knowing smile. Somewhere, in the distance, the next challenge awaited. The game of intellect, observation and deduction would continue, and Hercule Poirot would be ready.